All right, here we go with Krishnamurti around the merry-go-round of the human condition. In these chapters, he repeated a lot of the things he said before. So I'm going to try see if I can avoid too much repetition. In trying to understand a bit the overall picture, it seemed to me that Krishnamurti is trying to grapple or grasp the relationship between consciousness as thought and the movement of conditioning and time, self and time, and this underlying sense of emptiness that we're also seemingly afraid of. It's as though the picture he paints of human consciousness is that he has arisen as a movement propelled by fear away from this sense of emptiness in us or in the universe. At one point, I happened to be just flipping through one of the volumes of the collected works, and I came upon a sentence by him, or several sentences, a paragraph, which struck me as he was trying to describe the structure, the levels of consciousness. I've shared, I think, this with some of you already. But he saw it like this, that there was a superficial level of consciousness. Now, he didn't define exactly. One can picture it for oneself, maybe. It's just what goes on normally in our heads, what we hear, what we don't hear, but basically is a stream of consciousness. The streaming service of consciousness is just going on a daily basis, remembering, desiring, doing practical things, concerned with this, with the other. That self-occupation at that surface level seems to be what he might have been referring to. He might even include the unconscious, so-called, or the deeper layers. That's still for him pretty superficial. Below that is memory, meaning the whole thing functions on memory. Thought is just operating on this basis of memory. Without memory, he suggests, thought wouldn't function. It needs the known in order to operate. Thought is a response of memory in every aspect of our lives. He says, basically, we look at it in a little more detail. He says below that, that's his placement. I cannot vouch for it, but that's his placement. Below that, below memory, there lies the will to become. So this whole impetus to become is underlying that memory, which in turn then manifests itself or responds in this superficial stream of consciousness. So the whole thing is moved. I would imagine, I picture it this way, whether correctly or not remains to be seen, as being powered by this will to become. But below that, and all around it, he says, there is nothing. So to me, that only suggests, and I offer it as my own mental picture. Please do look into it yourselves and hopefully come up with the truth. That is, that we know this nothingness. We are aware of it at a certain level, and there is a movement away from it, out of the denial of something, of our own being. It's death in many ways, is an emptiness, is a nothingness. And we cannot somehow thinking, maybe a problem of thinking, we can't think nothingness. We have to think something. Thought is bent, tied to things. is tied to the particularity of manifestation, and then the interrelationship and so on, seeks the laws, seeks necessities, but is bound to things. See, even the ancient Greeks, the first-rate thinkers that they were, could not conceive of the number zero. Nothing did not exist, you see. They were right, of course. Nothing did not exist, so the number zero had to be imported from India, which led Bertrand Russell, one of the great mathematicians, to make a very good joke. He says, the greatness of India, the Indian culture, is that they invented nothing. It's a very British sense of humor. No? But the nothing, it turns out, you see, and that's why some people would interpret this as typically Indian thinking, that this is the sense of emptiness and nothingness that underlies all things. That things are pervaded by nothingness. They are expressions of energy, though. Nothingness is not nothing. It's no thing, but it's energy. And energy is creative. And one of the creative aspects of energy is matter. And that becomes thought. Okay, says thought is matter, memory, and the whole movement of consciousness, which then, because it is a thing and is bent upon permanence and continuity, is afraid of the nothingness from which it comes. So I begin to picture roughly, because I try to make sense of the whole thing for myself, that to whatever extent that reaches, always limited, that what Kay is trying to make sense is how this develops. There's movement of consciousness that springs from this ground of creative nothingness, then gets scared of it because it is something and wants to continue as something, becomes frightened of it and becomes, how you say, develops the will to become. And that's the movement of human consciousness. Now, what he's trying to do with this investigation into self-knowledge seems to be to face that fear, face the nature of consciousness, see if that holds or if it is not at the source of human conflict and misery. That's, as you know, that's where he says basically has his own place, has his own beautiful function. Look how much thought can be beautiful. Can it? It can be, it has its own order, right? You read some great work of literature or some great work of history even, and so on. You can see the beauty of thought to whatever extent it can go in architecture and so on, right? Krishnamurti went down on his knees before the Parthenon. The Greek culture was based on measure, and we will see measure for him was the ground of illusion. And yet, the quality of intelligence that they manifested was sufficient for him to go down on his knees. So there is a very strong, very, how you say, fundamental dialectic that is not just Greeks or the Indians or cultures here and cultures there, but in us, that we embody this dialectic of the universe in as much as it has developed. A consciousness as a material process has developed from that nothingness and now is bent on an escape, on a perennial escape from that ground. Human beings are escaping, Kay says. But we cannot escape, and therefore we're bound in illusion. Whoa. I'm going to terrify you right at the beginning so that we have a feeling of fear and terror relating to our own existence. You would take that seriously. So, I seems to would start on a different note than what we have for today, but it's not really. It's that I try to get as big a picture as possible for myself. Otherwise, I cannot articulate even any coherent kind of presentation, any kind of unfolding thing like that. You see, I need that for myself. So that's the kind of thing I come up with in reading this text for today, the topic being conditioning. Now, that's basically what he puts at the center of human consciousness as it exists now. It's the ground of conditioning. That is conditioning that, characterizes the human mind. So, and then I added other chapters that in this book seem to me were related to this question of conditioning, put in tradition, because a lot of our conditioning comes from that background, the heart and the mind, because the conditioning applies to our thinking and feeling and their interrelationships. And then fear, which is one major factor of conditioning, and as you can see, is actually for him at the very root of consciousness, perhaps. And then the question of suffering, which is really what it all amounts to in the bigger picture. For him, this whole movement of conditioning ends up being at the heart of suffering. So, the first Buddhist great truth, noble truth, is there is suffering. He's saying there is suffering, and it has these roots. Suffering has a cause, and there is an ending of that cause. So Krishnamurti is bound to that perception of there is suffering, there is a cause of suffering, and there is an ending, therefore, because everything that has a cause has an ending to that suffering. Is that possible? It's a question, but he's going along those lines. So what is conditioning? We know pretty much what it is, right? That is, we've been exposed in our Western culture. It's been a key concept, really, in many ways, especially in this last century or so, right? They studied the animals, they studied behavior, and they came up with this word, conditioning. So there is Pavlov's dogs, there are the behaviorists, and they all went about it. Are we conditioned? What does conditioning mean? And this is, of course, just applied to living organisms. All organisms are conditioned. Everything in the world, Bohm would go as far as to say, you see, to be a thing is to be conditioned. Because everything exists only within a set of conditions. Right? So we can't be, perhaps, without being conditioned. We can be anything. So that's another issue, right? Broader issue. The moment we are a thing, we're inherently conditioned. But we're talking about psychological reflex systems that are created in us, right? You know, the dogs, the whole reflex thing, what did he call it? Conditioned reflexes, right? So there are reflexes, meaning we will act. You see, the basic knee jerk. So the doctor tests you. Do you have good reflexes? We have to have good reflexes. Okay? That's the quintessence of conditioning, in that it sort of just is the stimulus and response. Doesn't go through the central nervous system at all. Goes through another center and comes right back from the spine or whatever. I don't know exactly the physiology. But those can be conditioned, meaning the stimulus can be changed through repetition, repetition basically, through habit. You know, the story of the dog, right? The dog salivates naturally, has a natural reflex to salivate when they see food. But then they ring a bell or they turn on a light whenever the food is presented. Eventually, the dog associates the two, the presence of food and the ringing of the bell. And one day, there is no food, but they ring the bell and the dog salivates. Right? This is nationalism. This is religious affiliation. This is the whole thing. We may have a natural reflex to protect our territoriality and so on, but then they're associated with the flag, with the name, and so on, and we go kill for those things. There is no food. There's no threat. There is nothing. There's not even a nation. It's all an invention of the human mind. But we have conditioned ourselves, like the dog, to react to these things. There is no God anywhere to be seen, and yet people kill for that supposed God because they associated the highest value with that word and that tradition. That's conditioning. Comes from tradition and the values that we have associated with these things. Massive danger there, massive tragedy for humanity yesterday, today, and tomorrow, unless we see this clearly and can uncondition ourselves that way. That if there is no food, stop salivating. If there is no real threat, but it's an invention of the mind, stop defending and stop attacking and stop pretending to be what you are not. Simply said, but massive energies behind it, see? So our human conditioning is one fundamental challenge that we have, because it's dangerous. It's inherently dangerous because of this associative principle. Can be associated with anything through habit, and that's what education does. It creates these loops of association so that we will respond in certain predictable ways, right? And nationalism is one of them, religious affiliation is another, racial, you name it. All kinds of things that we're taught that we are. These partial, circumstantial phenomena are associated primarily with our notion of being, which is the highest value of all. Right? What I am is what I will defend with all that I have. So whatever you associate with that being is what you will fight for. What if we are none of that? Right? So the question of being is very important. Krishnamurti puts the notion of the me at the center of conditioning. I was thinking, why does he put it there? Well, he puts it at the center because every conditioning is basically fundamentally in us associated with the I am. My feeling, anyway. What am I? I am Spanish. Well, I'm not. I am and I'm not. Catholic. I was brought up Catholic. Suppose I went through that, they tried to get this dog to salivate before those bells. They were ringing lots of bells. That's one of the things they did in my childhood. They kept ringing the bell, you see. And they presented us with the food. It was a little wafer, but and it wasn't much food. At least they gave us something to eat. Most of the time they just ring the bell and you don't eat anything. So it's the conditioning and the association, and then you grow up to believe that this is what you are. And that self will defend that thing because it has invested its being in these associated stimuli that have been created by tradition. Tradition is very important in this way. You see, they will tell us what we are. And Kay says, what is tradition? See, Catholic tradition, Spanish tradition, any number of traditions. They're all traditions. Now, tradition, the word, as you know, comes from tradare, which means to hand over. So tradare, tra is through, across, dare to give. So to give over, you give across, you pass over, right? Hand over. So it's simple. What is handed over? Well, what did they hand over to me? The knowledge that had been there, the past, then the history of the people, then they transferred the system of belief, came with his own morality, his sense of identity, what you believed in, what you stood for, the values that you were holding, the behavior that you were expected to have. Because conditioning is about behavior. They tried to condition us properly, to behave ourselves through a system of reward and punishment. Right? That's another structure of conditioning. You all function through reward and punishment because generally the animal is, again, instinctively meant to respond. Well, instinctively responds to pleasure and pain. Right? So we apply that too, right? So we get the poor monkey to do whatever we want through a system of reward and punishment. The monkey wouldn't naturally do what we ask him to do, but we can guide them, you see, by giving them shocks here and rewards there. They will go and I don't know what they do with the poor monkeys. So that's us. Society is doing that. We're doing it, but interestingly enough, you see, we're doing it to ourselves. The mind is trying to control itself through the system, is trying supposedly to bring about a quality of right behavior by pushing these buttons of reward and punishment and insisting on the quality of being, establishing an identity which is naturally divisive, right? Krishnamurti says the brain is naturally conditioned to protect itself. So fear is also natural to the brain because it's exactly the response, instinctual response to the presence of danger. So fear is nothing unnatural, like pleasure is not unnatural or pain. Those are part of the very instinctual intelligence of the body. We can call it that. I think Kay even used the word intelligence. So even if he says it's conditioned, he puts intelligence next to it, whereas what we're saying would signify a kind of lack of intelligence, because we're not seeing the actuality. I'm no longer seeing that the bread is not there. I'm just salivating at the sound of the bell. So that's illusion. Conditioning for us has a lot to do with self-deception and illusion. We give values to unreal things and we react to them because of the association and the punishment and reward and entity that has been put on them. We continue to believe that they're actual and we act accordingly. So that's a dangerous system, which is why the wars exist, why these nations exist, why all this incredible movement of competition, of aggression, of deception that goes on a massive scale. Really, when one looks at it, it's a bit, I say, tragic, the whole thing, because it's all unnecessary. See, whereas we think it is necessary, but it's just driven by this illusion of conditioning, which comes from tradition, which creates an identity which is inherently divisive. And then you see the fear, the danger is natural response of the body. These are natural responses, but then they're taken over by thought. Thought takes over the whole movement of instinctual bodily intelligence and response. Now, he says, Krishnamurti says, but thought is conditioned. Is it conditioned per se? Or is it conditioned by the particular culture? Is thought per se conditioned? Now, you would say it would be conditioned per se, because it is just memory. It doesn't matter whose memory it is. If it is a Jewish memory, see, we divide memories by labels. A Jewish memory, a Christian memory, a communist memory, an American memory, a Nigerian memory. The memories are localized, are defined, but a particular experience is filtered by a particular identity, which then has that particular experience. Whereas, and Krishnamurti makes this point very clearly, conditioning is the universal structure of consciousness. In the sense of it establishes patterns, it becomes a movement, how do you say, a series of patterns to which we respond. It doesn't matter where we are or what the pattern, what the content of the pattern is. It's all driven by pleasure, pain, fear, and self. And behind all that is just thought. These are the appearances almost. The feelings are genuine, but are produced by thought. When thought produces it, it's the same as the dog salivating when he hears the bell. Thought is the great conditioner, the great conditioning. It can be, and it generally is, right? Because the brain is seeking psychological security, it associates it with this psychological movement. Okay, it says, careful there, that's where we go wrong. Now, why is that wrong? We all need security. How is it that psychological security is illusory? Now, we may have to look at thought because thought is behind the whole movement, according to him. Not only is the self a creation of thought, right? But pleasure is a creation of thought, so is pain, so is fear. So the whole movement of self, thought, self, and time, and its three, what he called the three active principles of consciousness, pleasure, fear, and pain, are driven by thought. So if we want to understand these things, we have to understand thinking. Now, he says it's just a response of memory. He doesn't go much further than that. But I found a phrase in Bohm when he wrote about dialogue, which I thought might encompass a lot of the aspects that Krishnamurti himself sort of brings out separately. And I'm going to read just that sentence about what thought is. Just, I found it interesting just to try and grapple, what to grasp, what is thought? What is, apart from the fact that it is the response of memory, what more structurally is involved in thinking? So he says, and for our consideration, it's a collection of concepts, memories and reflexes. So even the reflexes are there, memory, reflexes, concepts. That is a collection of that, colored, he uses a vague verb there, colored by personal needs. fears and desires. So you can see the relationship, how it all begins to function, all of which are limited and distorted by the boundaries of our language, history, and culture. Now, that gives to me at least, let me go slowly into it because, these theoretical scientists are very good at piling things up. We have to split them apart a little bit. So it's a collection of concepts, memories, and reflexes. That's the background of memory, right? But is how memory also works, right? What the content of memory? So it can be a simple photo type of thing, right? Some people have photographic memories, so they remember license plates. Like they took a photo of this license plate, they didn't remember it. So there is all kinds of things involved in that memory, right? And it's my memory and other people's memories, right? I carry the memories of my parents and the memories of other people, all kinds of memories and concepts. Concept is perhaps a little more abstract, no? But the concept is everything for thought. Would thought function at all without concepts? It needs concepts. The dictionary is a collection of concepts. Right? The language, therefore, as integral to thinking in terms of mapping. It needs a map. Thought is a mapper, a map maker, rather. Mapper, that doesn't exist. A map maker. So it's trying to map the world, but for that it needs these abstractions and needs distinctions and similarities. It works that way, through distinction and similarity. And that's the nature of concepts. The concepts marks a little area of difference as well as similarity with other things. That's how it goes. And reflexes. You can see that we are reacting reflexively. For thinking is also reflexive. Bohm has a great book, I recommend it, called Thought as a System. Actually, there's a word there that's missing in the title, which is thought as a reflex system. It really is an exploration of that notion, that our thinking is reflex. And the nature of conditioning is exactly this, that it is reflex. Conditioning is the reflex is the very nature of conditioning. So you can see that thinking can also function in a reflex manner, is involved in the conditioned process. This is colored by personal needs. What drives it? You see, this is like the basic structure, content of thought, of what it operates on. But what causes it to operate? What causes it to move? What causes it to respond? Personal needs, fears, and desires. That looks like this is the very movement of thought. Kay would say fear and desire are made by thought. Actually, they're produced by thought. But there are also just instinctual drives which thought may pick up on, right? The desire for security, the desire for pleasure, the desire for shelter. See, it could be desire of any kind. We have those needs, but thought fabricates, adds further illusions on them, all of which are limited and distorted. So this is already limited by a lot. There's a lot of limitation already in having concepts, memories, reflexes, needs, fears, and desires. It channels the whole thing to the me, right? But it's distorted by the boundaries of our language. So language itself is a conditioning factor. History, the tradition that comes through, it also limits, and culture. I see in this description a pretty good mapping that thought is doing also of itself, if that's possible, regarding the inherent limitation of thinking and its inherent conditioning as being bound on the past. Kay always brings it there. The time is too much with us. Thought is inherently bound to time. And that time-bound principle, because it is the past, limits it necessarily and makes it mechanical, because the past can only respond to recognition, what it understands. I'm not sure it is that mechanical as that, right? But there is this mechanical, let's say there's a mechanical core. Therefore, conditioning is inherent, would seem to be inherent to the nature of thought as operating on this basis. Right? It has to do with feeling because he looks at thought and feeling, right? How are they related? For most of us, thought and feeling seem to be two separate things. It's an everlasting discussion, right? A friend of mine says, feeling is what gives you access to truth. And another says, rubbish. Without thought, there is no truth. So we have this argument going in one of our dialogue groups that nobody can figure it out. So the relation between thought and feeling, right, between intellect and emotion, it has been one haunting question, at least in Western civilization, ever since he woke up among the Greeks. Case says they are one. Now, what does that mean? We see they are two and three and four. They split, right? Now, how are they one? If thought breeds fear, pleasure, and pain, like Case says, then they're one. The one that makes it, it creates that. But we separate ourselves from our feelings. We disown our feelings. We say that our fear is not me. We have this capacity to separate thought from feeling, also thought from other thoughts. Fragmentation, it seems to be the nature of the self. It separates the observer, and the observed business comes back very quickly into the picture. No? Can we see, therefore, thought, the connection between thought and feeling? They may both be conditioned. So it's not like truth or not truth is the question. Is whether they're both conditioned or whether they're both free. Kay denies freedom in the field of thought, generally speaking, which is quite something to say, right? Because we depend on thought for so many things. He says there's no freedom here because it's inherently divisive. And it's inherently divisive because it is the response of memory. It's rooted in the past, is operating from the past, cannot perceive the fullness, may perceive partly maybe, of the new. And therefore it can't respond fully to the challenges that we meet in life. And that's the source of pain and suffering and conflict that we encounter. That's the essence of suffering that this conditioned consciousness brings about. That's what he's putting forward, right, as being the principal factor of our sorrow, conditioning, therefore, in thought, as division and fragmentation, inherent limitation of thought, brings about this inadequacy of response to life, which is the pain of our existence, division, conflict, and sorrow. So he comes to the point of denying. You see, he sees a tremendous contradiction in the very movement of the brain. The human brain, for him, is caught in an illusion. The fundamental illusion, as he sees it, is that he's seeking security where none is to be found. If he's correct about this, how you say, this causal examination of the nature and movement of thought, that it ends up necessarily in this division, conflict, and sorrow, then our search for security within that domain is indeed illusory, because we're trying to reach a result that cannot be obtained by this means. That is insane. Is mankind caught in that insanity? It would seem like it is. Everything points in that direction, though we have to go further, right? Whatever points in the direction may just be temporary. But you see, humanity is falling into that pattern time and time again. It's now very, very much caught in that pattern. And is being led by the totally delusional human beings, which are about to destroy each other for this delusory form of thinking. They do not see the connection, the danger of fragmentation that is inherent to thought as seeking security in identity. There is no security in identity because it's the essence of fragmentation, and Guru Krishnamurti's principle that where there is division, there must be conflict applies. See, it's almost mathematical when you look at it from Krishnamurti's point of view. But if you grasp the principle that where there is division, there must be conflict, then you have the essence of the destructive elements of consciousness as we know it now, because it's partial, because it's divisive. And it fragments itself more and more and more and more, right? It fragments the individual from society. It fragments society, different aspects of society from each other, fragments one society from another, fragments it within. It's all fragmentation, right? That is the most dangerous thing. Curiously, Kay says, you see, the brain's intelligence is geared and functions properly in the perception of danger. But for some reason, and he didn't go into it in this text, in these texts, it seems to be conditioned not to perceive the danger of thought. So it puts its endeavor for security, its drive for security, which is tremendous. You see, everything is about security, right? And everything leads to insecurity. Worse, leads to destruction. So this brain is caught in a self-contradictory movement. And he says, this is not seeing it. So this is a question that has to be posed. Why does the brain not see the inherent destructiveness of the inherently divisive movement of thought, which is the conditioning in which we are caught? Apart from the social conditioning, apart from the tradition that tells us you are this and you are that, or not this and not that. See, these are your enemies, these are your friends. This is what you should aspire to. Apart from that, it's inherent to consciousness. That's why he says the problem is not improving the structure of society or bringing about new governance, new political systems or trade systems. Of course, we have to do that, in my view, in any case, but it is the mind itself. It's the mind in its inherent inner structure. So it's not the Chinese or the Americans or the Russians or the Europeans or the South Africans or the Argentinians, whoever it is. See, we always mention the North, not the South. I don't know what we're doing. We should start from the South. It's not the Nicaraguans. It's just us who are playing these games of power. Right? It's all about games of power. Right? So this is destructive, and it has this root, he says, and that comes from fear of this nothingness. Interestingly, in these texts, I came upon an interesting aspect of his dealing with nothingness, which was, see, I just take it. Normally, he just puts it this way. See, last time we were talking about it as well, towards the end particularly. He had brought this metaphor of the desert, and that as long as, we escape from our own inner emptiness, we perpetuate the desert. The desert is just an escape from what is. Nothing can flower in the field of illusion. And these escapes are illusory. And all the measures that thought applies are illusory. One of the systems of measurement of thought, or the essence of measurement, is comparison. He says that actually we create at least the impression or the feeling of emptiness by comparing ourselves with others. I thought that was interesting because I just took it that, we perceive the emptiness and we get, scared to bits and run away, because it's the negation of our being anything. And the very drive of thought and self is to be something. Doesn't understand nothingness, doesn't understand death. It's impossible for it to understand that because its essence is to be something. But there it is. I know. There's another emptiness we manufacture. We manufacture everything. We're great manufacturers. This brain is an industrial brain. So it's manufacturing emptiness, that he says. It's creating the feeling of emptiness artificially by comparing ourselves with other people. I feel depressed. I don't. But I feel depressed because I compare myself with somebody who's better, who has more knowledge, who is more skillful at this and that and has more and so on. So we compare. This measurement, he says, creates the feeling of our being nothing. Right? So he says that's one element of pain for us, from which we try to escape by achievement. So becoming also has to do with this comparative movement. Ambition is a way of compensating for this feeling of inferiority, of being less. Measurement plays havoc with us, and it is illusory. He says this is the essence of illusion. To seek to become away from, as an escape from what is. The only radical change, peace, transformation that is required is not to escape. Stop escaping. Stop comparing. There is no nothingness there. There's no emptiness to be afraid of. There's still emptiness, though, to meet, if it's my view. You will still have to meet that one nonetheless. And you may go through the same panic as before. Fear seems to be inherent to this movement of becoming. As long as we are in the movement of becoming, it's not that we're just comparing, but that we're afraid of not being. That's it. We create the opposite. Becoming is always creating the opposite. It's creating the failure. The pursuit of success carries with it the fear of failure. Fear is involved in all this movement. But he says one approach to this emptiness is not to create it by this comparison. If you don't compare, you are what you are. And what you are, and staying with what you are, is like the same as staying with being, is the same as being, and that being opens up to the nothingness that is behind it. Is that correct? Or are we all going to run away? Again, in a panic. So, all right, conditioning, tradition, the heart and the mind, fear and suffering. Again, you see, they're in this dynamic, as far as I'm concerned, of the movement of time, self, and being, something, becoming, versus the nothingness that is continuously trying to escape from, but which is the actual. He said one beautiful thing, I think, in his notebook. He said, nothingness is not real, but it is the truth. So what do you want? Real means thing, right? The realm of things is reality. But there's not a thing. You see, emptiness is not real, but it is the truth. So if we want to live in truth, we may have to question and maybe deny reality. Voila. Drastic proposal for humanity. Let's discuss.
So Javier, I have 3 questions from your.
How many questions?
3. Can I ask one first, or I ask 3 altogether? Okay, so first, thank you for your sharing. So I just want to, share with everyone a little bit about my background. It was in reading Kay's book. I think the first book I read, which is over 35 years ago, when I was an undergraduate student and trying to figure out how to live in a society. I was in China, and the book was translated into Chinese, thinking of these things, and then instantly really much like his perspective, but on the other hand, realized that actually society does not function in such a way which based on his perspective, or maybe even our existential structure of ourself does not function that way based on his perspective. So moving forward, I brought that book with me to the United States, and then what really brought me to his work again, make a decision to take this class is by going through death of my parents over the last 3 and 4 years, and then the journey itself makes me want to again explore, what is the nature of life. And actually, my major for my PhD in the United States is molecular cellular biology. It's the same curiosity of my mind is what is the nature of life, but that investigation is from scientific perspective. And right now, I think I realize that I cannot explore the nature of life from philosophical, from scientific, and also from psychological perspective. So that's why I want to try to further explore different teachings from modern spirituality teacher. And from my reading of Kay's book, which is this book, and a couple of other people's we call modern spirituality teachers sharing. And I observed, I think we have 2 different type of existential structure. One of the structure, it requires the formation of psychological center. And then those are the teachers which would build their faith, right? So the faith, the system would help us to comfort us psychologically, so we can actually stabilize our psychological center to cope with the challenges in life. And the other type, which I think is the very minority, represented by Kay, or maybe one of the teacher I really likes at Yashante as a modern teacher, is they are definitely not psychological center based teaching. So I feel like the difference is fundamentally based on their existential structure. I mean, the approach, the goal is trying to actually stabilize our to express our nature, but because of the structures different, that they go different way. All right, so that's my first observation, and I think that right now I'm open to two different modes. One is trying to stabilize your psychological center. The other one is trying to dissolve. And the difference is, for my understanding, is because the existential structure is different. There's no one is more superior to the other one. The second is what is what is truth? Do we actually have that kind of direct perception to truth? If majority of our people, if majority of us, our existential structure is requires the building of psychological center. And then, our, just like you said, our perception is by nature conditioned. And in this regard, we don't have a, direct access to choose. And so that's my second question, right? The first question, what makes the difference? Why people perceive life differently? And the second question is, if our existential nature is conditioned in such a way that we actually cannot have the direct perception to choose. And then, understanding the truth, is that even essential? And or can we even make it possible, right? So
Possible.
that's my first question. My second question is, of course, right now with,
Oh, that was only the second, the first.
yeah, let's go for the first question. Go ahead, go ahead. Yeah.
No, no, no. Well, I think maybe we should. I think that's a very important question. Hold on to your second question,
Okay.
maybe. Should we? Uh, or maybe you can mention it and see what happens. But let's see. That's a very important question. Let me see. I thought there were two questions really in there, but one is about the nature of the self and the different approaches that people take. So that's why I thought it was going to be your second question, but it's actually I was counting. And the second is, if we're so conditioned, as Krishnamurti might imply, concern, how can we even perceive anything as it is, right? Well, that's a primary question, really. Truth, is there truth? Is it possible? Since, I mean, either what he says is true or not true. So there's also that, right? Now, can we not see what is true? He says this whole movement of thought, as when it enters perception, fragments our perception at best. We may be partly perceiving accurately, but we also are misperceiving. Is conditioned, is guided by the past, is controlled by its own desires, which may also be conditioned by the society, by the animal, and by the thought associated with it. Therefore, the whole thing has potential pitfalls at every point. At the same time, this is something I didn't say because I didn't go into the question of freedom, really, which he touches a lot in these chapters, as a matter of fact, as you saw. And he puts freedom at the level of perception. So he doesn't quite say that, we cannot perceive accurately. He said we have to perceive how we misperceive, which is, we take that how we perceive is accurate, but actually it isn't. What we don't see is that the so-called observer is the one perceiving, meaning is the past that is recognizing, projecting, experiencing what it has already put forward out of itself. You see, everybody who's conditioned will experience according to their conditioning, and that experience will be incorporated into the conditioning. So tradition, as this movement of the past, will keep feeding itself, right? That's why everybody keeps having the same experience. The moment they have a label and an identity, they will experience the same thing for generations. Their experience is still a Christian experience, a Jewish experience, a Muslim experience, a capitalist experience, a communist experience. Is the label that is the experience, is the notion. So that is where we get trapped. That doesn't see the new, that doesn't see truth. Truth goes beyond that experience because you can see is narrow by the very perspective we bring to bear on what's happening. So, Krishnamurti also said something very extraordinary phrase. I don't remember where, but he said, let me see if I can recall correctly. Uh, Freedom is in the very first step of our existence. Is an extraordinary phrase. It's been hanging at the back of my mind for a long time because freedom is at the very first step of our existence. And what's the first step of our existence? The first step of our existence is always now. So it's not when I was a kid. These are my first steps, right? Or mankind, right? But it's in every single moment. Why would that be? Because every single moment by itself, the now, is also beyond the past. If, the if is very large, perhaps, if that present, we were in that very now, in that very present, we will be already beyond time. We will be outside of time, and the perception would not be distorted by the time bound content of thought and memory. He suggests the possibility, and in fact, for him, he asserts it as an actuality. It just so happens that the past is very dominant, that we have put so much emphasis on the past as our security, as our being. Something happened in human development that we have invested our being and security on thought, on knowledge. Okay, he also has his reasons for explaining that we thought that, better the devil we know, that sort of thing. The past feels safe because it's already known, and the present is uncertain, and the future even more. Right? So we want security, and the past knowledge has been cultivated for that very purpose, to see that we know things, we can handle them, then we are safe within the known. Okay, he says the known applied particularly in relationship where the immediacy of connection is more important, you see, because the known also separates. And the moment it separates, it divides. And the moment it divides, it creates conflict. So it's destroying its intent to security within the known is his own contradiction, is self-defeating. This is his diagnosis. Now, if we were to perceive that danger that might silence the mind, might stop the mind in its tracks, that's what happens when we see something dangerous, a dangerous movement psychologically in us, it stops. That's the beauty of perception. So there is perception. There is perception of the actuality, of the misperception of thought, of the danger of thought. That opens up to a new perception of a different order in which thought does not enter. That's where he puts freedom. And he says that's in us. That's part of us, inherent, that this freedom is in the first step of our existence. Write it in your office, on the wall, on the door. So people might just be afraid to cross the door, but the first step is the last step. Also, you see, that is the thing. Okay, says no continuity here. Also, that's a very difficult thing because we want continuity at every point. That's our safety again. That's our being. We invested in continuity. See, and he says there's no continuity in truth. Boy, does that destroy science, James?
Just in the section around heart and mind, he
Mm.
has a slightly different framing than freedom. It has to do with the awareness, this attention, this love, this is the highest, but it's the quality of the quietness when the brain is completely awake and the mind becomes quiet, which is the mind becomes quiet, like in that moment when you are incredibly aware of there's a crack behind you and you're walking in the woods, kind of a thing. You keep terribly awake to survive, is the phrase that he uses. So the man in the jungle of the world must keep terribly awake to live completely, which is another nice way of saying to be present to what is without thinking about it. This sense of quietness, which he never says how, he says just go out and start doing it, right? Basically, that's his definition of meditation,
Mm.
is to be in that place. And that is a place of inquiry as well, because that's the arising of insight. So Lucy has some wonderful questions, but to hold those questions without thinking about them,
Mm.
you know? And what comes out when you say, well, I can't, not thinking about that, not thinking about that, not thinking about that, to the point where you have nothing else to think about except the intention to hold that question. That's one of those phrases I haven't heard them. It was that one and the thing about the false emptiness. Those two phrases that came out from these sets of readings are really significant for me in terms of another way to frame what it is to be.
False emptiness. This is just
Yeah, the
extraordinary.
false emptiness and
I
this
wrote
other one
that.
about the mind being totally awake, or the
I was
brain, or whatever,
impressed
the
by
mind,
that.
brain, heart being totally awake and no division, no fracturing, no anything. And in that moment, it's intelligence, but it's a universal intelligence. It's not yours, it's not mine, it's not hers, it's not his.
Mm.
It just is. And in that place arises the truth, because it's only there in that place. But that place is outside of time and space. So existential questions aren't about thinking about them. It's more
Mm.
like being that.
Mm. Well, we're doing a bit of questioning.
Yeah, I understand that, but the questions are coming in so that we can put them aside, that it's not that, it's not this, it's not that.
Eventually, that's right. It's a
Yeah.
perception. The matter of perception is where it all plays out. Yeah, right, right. Thought may just push us to the edge of not knowing. Thought, that's also this thing, right? He questions and questions, and then he realizes he has no answer.
Isn't that the place where you're supposed to jump?
Well, you jump naturally because I mean, unless you retreat, right? These civilizations do this and people do this. They come to the point of not knowing. They come to the point of absolute uncertainty and they back out. It's just frightening. So they go back into Christianity and things like this. See, so or whatever else we find safety in. So there is also that. So to stay there, and if you stay there and you hold to the fact, because it is a fact, that thought has no answer, then the energy is there. It's not divided. At that point, thought is not creating division because it has reached the limit of itself. See, that's a beautiful thing about that can happen also. He's reached his own limit. Therefore, he's not in contradiction with anything because he's not trying to manipulate the situation. And he naturally stops because what he wants is an answer. And if he has come upon the fact that he has no answer, he doesn't move. That non movement of thought, if the energy is still there to find out, can precipitate this insight. That's one of the senses I have as to how insight might work. One of the ways it works, as a matter of fact. Yeah. That insight is, of course, that jump is an act of perception that is not yours or mine, is intelligence. And it sees something true, as he said, without the shadow of a doubt.
The intelligence is the energy. Like when he talks about, like
Yeah.
in towards the end of his life, that's what he was saying is the energy that's flowing within, that energy that is there after you stop thinking about it,
Yes.
that moves you through that.
You're very much into energy and so on. And you notice this thing about, he said that it was the energy of silence
Yes.
wiped away the past. That was quite, I mean, I said, what? Right? The energy of silence is what wipes away, or breaks, in fact, to begin with, breaks the momentum of the past. The past is a causal system, is a movement in a chain of causation, and he has his own momentum, driven by this becoming and security. The silence, the energy of silence is what breaks the chain and wipes the past away.
It's very alive in that movement. There's an enormous aliveness in that, as opposed to the sense of the memory of something doesn't have that same sense of aliveness to it.
Poor memories are mostly half ashes at any rate. Most memories contain a high level of ashes. See, it's the past. So, Lucy, second question.
It's the awakening. So this is such a commonly used word in modern spiritual world or spiritual world, right? So awakening, what does that mean? To me, I just feel from our teaching, sharing last couple of weeks, awakening means dissolving the self-identity. That's what I think. And then, but on the other hand, because the majority of the people, the existence structure requires the formation of psychological center, and that whether that will be even possible. Because can we actually change our existential structure? That's the first question. If not, whether awakening is even possible for most of the people when their existence structure requires formation of the psychological center, which is the security. And it's that first one. And second one is from case perspective. I know his psychological existing structure, or maybe Javier, right? This awakening means to you.
We missed, I think, I don't know if everybody else, but there was a little break somewhere there in your speech. The connection sort of broke a little bit.
Your
So I'm not sure
question?
if
Okay.
I missed
So,
anything significant.
yeah, my second question would be, okay, my second question is, what is awakening? And for most of the people, if they have the existential structure, which the psychological
Progress.
formation inherited, right? Whether those awakenings even possible for those type of people. And second, from K's existential structure, which I assume Javier is similar, so that you would spend your entire life to share his teaching. And what does this awakening mean? Awakening mean to you?
Yes, well, right. Awakening means not to be asleep. See, what he's describing is mankind is asleep, right? So basically, it means this is one a basic way to put it, right? We are asleep because we're living within the framework of the past. It's like being in a dream. Right? We're just ourselves psychologically, what are we? But our own self-remembering, right? So that is a shadow. The past is the shadow of our being, is overshadowing our being and taking its place. Mankind has become his own shadow. And because it's living in the past, is creating a division between it and life. Though it says this past is what helps me to live. And maybe partly true that. So this is an interesting question, no, to find out, because you assume, of course, and most of us assume, I suppose most of mankind assumes, that the formation of a psychological center is necessary. What did you say for existential? Is an
Structure.
existential,
Yeah.
existential factor that we needed because it's associated with security, which we all need. Kay is saying security is important. We all need it. But false security is what destroys the real security we all need. If he's right about that, and we awake to that fact, right? If we wake up to that fact, then that's enlightenment, you see, in the sense of whatever clears the field of deception is light. Deception is darkness, insight is light. The perception of the false and the true is the nature of intelligence. That's the light we're talking about. Enlightenment, of course, has deeper meaning, so more consequential in terms of not just a momentary thing, which we all have had, those moments in which we saw something true, dissolve some shadow in us, some complex that was casting its own misery over our existence. People know these moments of freedom. Kay is talking more radically, and that's perhaps the challenge. He's saying, can there be an insight into the very heart of consciousness that builds this system, which is behind the suffering of humanity because it's inherently self-contradictory and therefore illusory. So no security at all. See, that would be that would be insight. That would be awakening. We are asleep in this mode, so much asleep that we do not realize the danger we represent to ourselves. That's to be totally asleep. No? So the point is, let's look carefully because we suffer. Let suffering stir us into waking up. In our sleep, one of the things that wakes us up is terror, laughter, and pain. So, I mean, at least I mentioned just three, probably other things. They need to go to the bathroom. That's another one. But that is more elementary, the needs as well. But psychologically, these are the things. Aren't we all scared? Then wake up. Aren't we all suffering? Wake up. Right? And so on. So, what was the other one? I forget.
I have a comment on the existential structures.
Mm.
Well, my way of interpreting what you're saying or understanding what you're saying is like when Javier started the conversation about, superficial and memory. That's the building of an existential structure. Who am I? Why am I here? What does it call me to do? Those kinds of questions are and built around the me and the my and the mine. That's what he's pointing to and saying, not this, not this, not this, not this, not this. Because in his knowing is that there's something else other than that, right? And then Adyashanti, who has a personality and a wonderful thing like all of that, he's not coming from that structure. He's a living example of someone who expresses through a personality. Personality is not an existential structure. His existential structure is different than, more in alignment with Kay's.
Mm,
Kay is one of his references
mhm,
on life
mhm,
and how to be in the world,
mhm,
just like Nisargadatta was, which also doesn't have that existential structure of me,
mm,
right?
mhm,
So in your question was it's either this or this, or it's this and what else is there? Like, if that isn't my existential structure, what is?
mhm.
That's what you awaken out of. But what awakens is the awareness of that being. That's not a structure in the sense that we can point to it and look at it. It only comes, it's in existence all the time. That's that, if I look at Caviar's thing, there's the will to become, and underneath the will to become is that which manifests a will to become.
Mm,
So the structure is different than an ego structure. It's expressed through this physical body and this personality,
mhm,
that will to become.
mhm.
So the question is, to go back to your questions, most of your questions is on the left-hand side of the page that has to do with I'm looking for something that I can point to like a thing. Because you have to change your definition of existential structure to actually see where K is or where Aja is coming from or where you are.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, I understand what you try to say. Yeah.
Third question.
Well,
Oh,
maybe other people want to participate a little. That's also forgive me. I have a little bit of a nosebleed for some reason, so I have to take care of that. So that's why I was a bit out of the picture. Anybody else wants to comment a little bit on that? Or you want to go to the third question?
Third,
Very interesting questions. Okay, so
third question, because the reason I study K's work or other modern spiritual teachers' work is because of the death itself, right? I went through my parents' deaths, and then it's my turn, right? Hopefully it's 30 years down the road. So my question is, what is the reflection of death from K or your reflection? And that's the question for everyone, if it's not such a sensitive question for you.
We will be dealing with that more specifically in the last of the series, but that's not to postpone it. What is death? And because he basically puts emptiness, we see this emptiness that we're afraid of as death, whereas it may not be, right? Maybe the ground of life, but it has to do with that. What is death? Okay, sees death. You see, because death has his own objective reality. What is death? What is death for us? I mean, that's an interesting question because it has to do with this. He's calling for an ending. In fact, he says, insight suggests that what we are basing our life upon and what we call life needs to end in order for the fullness of life to be. See, there's an interesting dialectic inside Krishnamurti's teachings that just like there is a false emptiness, there's a false love, there's a false achievement, there's a false me, there's a false everything within this scope. He calls it illusory. So if the field of measurement psychologically is illusory, then you see, he says this must end, right? This must end. And that's death. Death psychologically, the ending of me. But then, of course, there's another death, much bigger, or not so big, or the same death, right? Which is the body. And in the cosmos, creation is death, because it's constantly ending and beginning. Right? So it has multiple dimensions, but the first level is this, the necessary ending of the me, as the nucleus of conditioning, of deception, illusion, conflict.
My thinking on death when we're talking about the death of this Judith person here is that how can something die that never existed in the first place? Basically, I'm a construct. So in one sense, I'm already dead because I never existed. So there's that kind of level of death that I sort of ponder on sometimes. That the fact that I am not here anyway, what is it that's going to die? Because I never was. My internet's breaking up, so I better not try to explain that any further. But
what do you say? What do people say? I have to take care of my nose. Sorry about that.
I mean, just thinking about it, I think it's maybe a little bit unfortunate to use the word death here. I mean, to die every day and so on. So, I mean, like you immediately make this connection to the physical death. And I think those two things have not that much to do with each other as it's maybe implied. So, I mean, why don't we just say the ending of the me, like rather than the death? I mean, I think that would make things a little bit less dramatic, I guess.
The ending of the illusion.
Yeah, exactly. You see, so that's not a death, right? That's like what Judith is saying, right? It's not really a death, it's just the ending of an illusion.
Yeah.
Well, could we consider death to be a resurrection rather than a resuscitation?
How's that? How's that? Explain some more, Dan.
Well, as a resurrection, so something has sort of disappeared permanently rather than continue to resuscitate that which is not always our friend.
Resuscitate. The reincarnation of me.
Yeah.
The reincarnation of the me. Ah. Yeah. Don't know what's happening with my nose. I hope I'm not dying. I used to have this as a kid. I don't know where it came. I had it today. I think I will survive, but maybe not. You see, death, death. I think that's as Andreas said. No, by not talking about the ending of self. See, that is really what we're talking about. This was a questioning in the dialogues between Kay and Bohm, because Bohm said, when you talk about death, you're saying about the ending of an illusion. So what is it that dies? I mean, does an illusion die? In a sense, right? We're peculiar beings, no? We are abstract beings. That our being psychologically is based on ideas, is based on images, is based on memories, desires, the operation of thought. We are creatures of thought. More than that, of course, there's an organism and there's perception. And even as Kay says, this freedom is in the first step of our existence. So there is something else that we can embody or channel or whatever you want to say, we can be. That our being is not limited to this. Maybe that's his basic issue, that our being has been limited by this domain of time. Okay? And that, in fact, there is a different domain that is possible. In fact, he wants to bring that different domain, the timeless perception, he calls it, to bear on time so that we are free from it, free from the false aspect of time that is impinging or trying or covering the domain of our being where it does not belong. This is what I hear him saying. Knowledge, time, thought have a place, an important place, as in the management of just about everything in our material world. We can't say the material world is an illusion. Some people say that. If it helps them, so much the better. But every day I have to, clean around and chop wood and draw water, like good old monks or Zen monks. So we have to do that. That's part of our existence, you see. So we have to manage these things. But he says internally, what are we? He has answered, we are nothing. Wait, who heard that properly? I'm not sure I heard that properly, because the movement of consciousness is to assert one's own being, one's own identity as something. Thought can't seem to be able to say, I'm nothing. He says it because things happen in our lives and they just overwhelm us, and we end up feeling that, we have no power, no capacity. Right? This is what I hear. Some of my friends, when calamities hit, they say, we are nothing. This is a common phrase around here. No somos nada. We are nothing, right? Because we are such a small thing and you're overwhelmed easily by circumstances. But case means it much more deeply, that actually at the source of our own being is this nothingness. It's this, and that nothingness is that freedom, and that nothingness is that intelligence, and that nothingness is the ground of love because it's the ground of relationship. When I am something, I'm inherently separate from something else. That's the implication. So he says, drop this something, be nothing, see what happens. You might discover that then you have a relationship with other human beings because you're no longer a barrier. You're no longer a separate entity, and therefore you can relate. And relationship is the most practical thing, because that's the ending of conflict. That means cooperation. That means we are together and not separate, and we have mutual concern. So the practical that competes and separates is contrary again to the whole question. He even puts it as a question of survival. I think that was James was bringing across, no? We have to be fully awake in order to live in the jungle. We have created a jungle for ourselves, and we have to wake up fully to it in order to face the danger that we represent to each other with this movement of time and self. The conditioning that consciousness has imposed upon itself and is not yours or mine, is not individual or collective, of this time or that time, is of consciousness itself. So it says, can we have an insight into that? Can we even begin to see, by the way, can we begin to appreciate the real dynamic of this conditioning of consciousness and its inherent danger? And if you can see through the false, that consciousness dies. But that consciousness, that idea, has tremendous power. You can see that it has power. Thought is a powerful tool. Okay? I think in the Mahabharata, they said that thought was the ultimate weapon. I think that's correct, you see. Metaphorically, they said it, I think. But that's it, it's all thought. All these weapons are created by thought because thought itself is the primary danger. And then he's trying to resolve his own problems, and he can't. He can only make them worse. So we have a primary challenge. We have to rise, though, to begin with, to that total perception of the inherent of how much thought covers the whole field, and how inherently it's creating its own dangers. This whole political world and so on, it won't solve its own problems because it's trapped in this dynamic. That's a major diagnosis worth considering. You see, normally we don't even rise to that level of total consideration of the problem, because it's one part trying to solve its own problem in relation to another part. But we're saying the fragmentation is already in the very movement of consciousness. It applies to everyone. That would be one first dissolution of conflict, of fragmentation, to realize that everyone is in the same fragmentation mode. Right? We are not going to solve our problems by being, as long as we are in that fragmentation mode. And he says, be nothing. What was it? Somebody was quoting some one day ago, reading the book, right? Happy, was it with you, Miles? We're reading Happy the Man Who's Nothing, right? That is that Kay did put even happiness in that emptiness and domain, because he has no problem, has no conflict. There is a happiness involved. But now we cannot take his word for it either, right? We have to find out what this emptiness is. Is it a false emptiness? Is it a real emptiness? Is it nothingness that one pretends to, that one invents because one wants happiness? That would be another false emptiness. It has to be a genuine one, right? Mankind has also tried this thing of denying ourselves, denying, in order to be happy. But we can't deny that way. We can't deny consciously. We can't deny by formula. The denial has to be by perception itself, that sees the false of the construct of being something. Then that becoming ends, naturally ends. It does. Miles, what you saying?
Oh, hey, really enjoyed everyone's contribution to the meeting today. Um, so my experience is it's not just thought. I'm constantly reminded of this substrate of time because I have this body, and the mind interprets to my body, of which it is a part. So it's interesting to see. I fear death because I seemingly have a body that is working together with this head. And so I'm reading an interesting book right now, Tripping on Utopia, Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson, The Cold War. And it's psychedelic research. And I think one of the, maybe a value of these mind altering drugs and these altered states is this sense of a loss of a body during these states. And I think there's value in having that experience. It sort of eliminates one major factor in this whole pursuit of touching the emptiness without the fear. And my body provides a feedback loop there that really keeps fear in place. That's my experience uh, of it. So to think my way out of not having a body or not having this relationship with a Lucy biology, carbon-based units, uh, can be a challenge, of course. And I know intellectually that I'm not going to uh, escape this thought loop using this tool of thought. You know? So anyway, I just wanted to thank everybody and offer that little bit. Um, really enjoyed the meeting today. Thanks, everyone.
Maybe this is a good time to bring the session to a close, unless somebody has a final comment.
Well, I've stepped into some confusion over what exactly, when Javier, when you use the word intelligence, how are you using that word? What does that mean?
All these words have to be delved into. Intelligence just means to perceive something as true or false, right? Accurately. So that's the general meaning. I mean, it has different meanings, but they use it now, artificial intelligence. The CIA has the word intelligence in it. I personally think they should take it out quickly. So you see, they call intelligence spying, right? The intelligence services. So, okay, intelligence means to read between the lines. What that means, you see, in the field of thought, thought is continuously saying things. Those are the lines, right? Like in a text. But we are not seeing the meaning, that actually the meaning of thought. See, is saying all kinds of things, but we are not seeing the meaning of thought. So intelligence in this field means to perceive into the meaning of thought. That's the specific meaning in this context, that thought is writing, see, all kinds of things in our heads, but it's not seeing whether it's true or false. The perception of the truth or the false of what thought says is part of intelligence. But then, beyond that, the perception and understanding of the nature of thought itself and its truth or falsehood, its illusory or factual content and, I say, constructive or destructive dimensions, that's even a deeper level of insight that we require. So intelligence is this quality of perceiving the true and the false to its depth. Right? And insight is one of its clearest manifestations. Right? When you have an insight, you know very well what that means. You perceive something to be true, and there's no two ways about it. You perceive something factual. That's intelligence. It's a surgical flash of light. Talk about awakening. It's the most awake you can ever be. Perhaps. I mean, maybe there's more to it, but that's basically an approach, quick explanation of the use of the word intelligence in this context.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Right.
And so thank you everyone for participating, especially Javier, of course. It's amazing how you do all this and clarify many things that may be raising questions or doubts and so on. So thanks very much again. And I just want to mention that we have on the website of the center website now are posted the is posted information about retreats, week-long retreats or study stays at the center, which we are starting again in April, from April until October. And you're welcome to look at the support persons that we have lined up to support anyone interested in further self-exploration or inquiry. So please do so if you are inclined. And otherwise, keep well until the next time.
Yes, keep well. I will try. All right. See you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Very low tolerance for stress. Instead of calmly processing frustration, their body reacts like it's in danger, switching straight into fight mode. The smallest inconvenience, a careless word, or even a change of plans can feel like a personal threat. And anger becomes the fastest way the brain knows to release that tension. This pattern often comes from childhood environments where emotions were either ignored or punished. If some
It's so easy to fall in love. So come to me, a call. I think it's so easy.